We're told we will land on the beach at Bernières-sur-Mer. This is what we've trained for 3.5 years. We feel ready, but we can't stop even if our best friend is hit. There is no surviving the beach unless we overrun the enemy's defenses, and to do that, we have to run like a bat out of hell straight at them.
A Company and B Company had been selected, and the house over there on the left was B Company, on the right A Company. And we were to advance and take there, and just about here, over here, 2 or 3 fellas got killed with a machine gun fire, and they wounded me in the leg. Jack Simpson was hit. Then we rushed to the wall, and we were up and over the wall within about 20 seconds. When we were 18 to 20, we were just young men like you. We used to have a rink. We used to clean the rink, play hockey. We used to go to dances. We'd do same things that we shouldn't do. We'd go for a few drinks, but they were never really any different than the young people today. You were no different than we were. Jack Simpson, he was probably my best friend. I knew he was killed when he got hit in the chest on the beach. And Stock came over one day, he says, "I love you, Charlie." And I mean, for him to say that was just like breaking the earth open, you know. I think Catling was hit on the beach first, and then he was hit again on the railway.
When Clarence told us he was being sent overseas, we all went down to the train station to see him off. He hugged and kissed each one of us boys, and of course Mom and Dad, and the whole family was there to see him get on the train. He looked at each one of us and he said, "Well, take a good look at me because you won't see me no more. I won't be coming back."
They'd have been excellent soldiers to have taken through to Germany and bring them home. But they were kind of all special to me. Because, I mean, I knew them all pretty well for 4 years, you know.
We tend to make the Normandy invasion too much of a game about generals and a game about an exercise almost in military valor. We've got to remember its purpose. Now, I'm not saying the young men who landed in 1944 all had studied enough civics to be able to give you a detailed view of the rise of the Third Reich and of the danger that it presented to the world. But all of them would have been able to express their view in terms of Hitler has to be stopped. We can't let the world be run by those Nazi thugs. What we're doing is important. We have no alternative.
During training in England and Scotland, when A Company reached the beach, we all formed up under section and platoon commanders. Very neat, but we never practiced what we'd do if our officers and NCOs were killed or wounded and out of action. We are assault troops, and proud that when we attack, A and B companies have been chosen to lead the rest ashore, commanded by 2 brothers, Majors Elliot and Charles Dalton.
We wondered about Charlie Martin, but we only wondered until the end of the first day, because he was one of those people who was sort of the bravest of the brave. At the first, people said, well, he doesn't have enough sense to know what he's doing, or he wouldn't be doing it. But he knew what he was doing, and he did it the right way. But he was a very, very brave man. He looked terrible. I mean, the company sergeant major is supposed to be the absolute acme of, next to the regimental sergeant major, the best looking person. He had things tied on him and so on. But he was just one of those people that had a job to do, and he figured, well, I guess I better get on and do it. And he did, and he survived. Yes. I thought if he lasted 6 months, it'd be a miracle.
Somebody asked me what kind of soldier I was. I said, well, not very good, but I could add a little color to it. I guess that would be fine. Yeah? I went my own way, I guess, that you could tell me what to do, and if I didn't like it, I did it my way. And that doesn't sound very like a good soldier, does it?
Prior to the campaign opening up in Russia, there were 300 divisions opposite us in France, Belgium, and Holland. And when we went, they were down to less than 30. Well, they said they had a wall all the way around. Well, of course, you can't have a wall that long, or if it would take years and years. As it was, they just stretched the German economy to the breaking point because of the amount of reinforcing steel they needed. But they were very clever. They put the places where they had the wall, where they could be defended with the minimum number of troops. The whole of Europe was at stake because the feeling was that if the Russians were beaten or even had to get a peace of some kind, there would be nothing to stop Hitler gobbling up all the rest of Europe and possibly, given time, the rest of the world. So that I think the average Canadian, certainly in my company anyway, felt that we were fighting an evil thing and that decent people wouldn't tolerate it. It'd go so far, but the time had come when, as one of my men said to me, I didn't come 3,000 miles to be left out of battle.
The Allies had been very fearful of the cross-channel assault. They'd been fearful of it because Churchill in particular believed that it might turn into a disaster, and he would wake up at night in a cold sweat dreaming of blood running in the English Channel, a repulse on a Dieppe scale, but much, much more large, much more intense.
June 4th, boarding day. We've been locked up for 2 weeks. All leaves cancelled so the word does not get out. Guarded by Americans, would you believe? D-Day is set for the 5th. Everybody working on the docks knows we're on our way. And give 'em hell, Canada. Remember Dieppe, and that sort of thing. I learn that I'm in charge of one of the assault crafts, and that we are to arrive in darkness just before first light. Everything else in this huge armada of ships and planes is in support.
We knew before we got on the boat that we were going to France, and we knew we'd seen the maps of the shore, but now we knew the names. We knew. So when it was delayed a day, they weren't really worried. Now I think the High Command, it didn't worry us, of course, that if they had to call the whole thing off, there'd be many, many people knew that where the regiments were going to land. And what happened when they picked the 3rd Division, people must remember, and I don't think they remember this, is that the 3rd Canadian Division was picked to take the center of the attack on the British Army front. They were dead center. And if they failed, if the 3rd Canadian Division failed, the whole front there would collapse.
I turned to my brother and said, well, good luck, I'll see you tonight. And he said, fine, fair enough. So he went off to his boats and I got in mine, but we never got around to discussing, do you think you'll be killed? what'll happen if we're both killed and so on. You don't talk about those things.
The waves were 6 feet high, and the boats were moving back at least 10 or 12 feet. And you had to climb down a rope ladder, which is a great big ropes just crossed, and you're carrying 50, 60 pounds. So there was a danger of people falling between the little boat and the mothership. So then what happened, I was the last fella down, and of course the boat moves out, and Bernières drops me in the water, but Mackenzie and Buck Hawkins, they grabbed me and pulled me in. Well, then we went around the mothership for over an hour. And of course we were getting quite worried now because it's getting daylight, it's wet, and all the men are getting wet and cold. So, but suddenly we got the okay to go.
The Channel is a terrible place, very uncertain, and does very unpleasant things without any warning whatsoever. I had been there and seen both Dunkirk and Dieppe take place, and I wasn't filled with any great encouragement about water landings. It didn't seem to me. You see, the last time a really successful one was carried out was when William the Conqueror took England. And that's 1066. That's rather a long time between landings.
If you look at the battlefield with a fine grain, if you look from the bottom up instead of the top down, you find that as soon as the battle begins, the plan falls apart. The friction of war takes over and the fog of war takes over. And in Charlie Martin's story, we see clearly how a company sergeant major, isolated with a small group of men, still has both the courage, which I don't want to denigrate, but in addition to the courage, the sense of purpose and the morale, instead of digging in and going to ground and waiting for someone else to do it, in fact to take on the task that has to be taken on.
It starts to get light behind us as we turn south towards France, 5 miles away. We move further and further away from the mothership, and it comes as a shock that suddenly there is just an awful lot of ocean. I look at the men in my boat. They're closer than friends, more like brothers. I realize that some of us will soon be dead. We'd been told the Knights of Columbus Canteen would arrange to wire flowers back home. To who, I thought. But now I decide I'll send flowers to my church outside of Toronto whenever anyone in A Company dies, so Canon Banks can say a prayer. I feel better. At dawn, we see the French coast and the town of Bernières-sur-Mer. It shouldn't look as quiet as it does. It was supposed to have been shelled by our guns. But all is still and peaceful.
Just remember, there was only 250 men from a mile beach, 10 boats, and when you spread them out on that beach, they just looked like little scattered flies. And it was probably the loneliest when you were here. You were all alone. The first battle, you don't have the same type of fear as you do the second one, because this is the first time we've seen somebody shot. It was the first time we've seen somebody killed. And I don't think it hits you till a little while afterwards.
Any man that says he wasn't afraid is a bloody liar, because although I wasn't shaking or anything like this, I had fear and that the first time I step on the beach, that would be it. It would be all over.
There was a lot of tension on the boat, sort of not knowing what was ahead of us, you know. We referred to it as the BB, the bloodbath, as we got joking around the barracks. Somebody would say, wait till the old BB comes along, you'll find out, you know. And people were not able to eat their breakfast, a lot of them. And the seas was rough. I know in all the training I had, I was never seasick until that day. And I was so sick that day I wasn't worried about anything.
We were young and foolish. You know what the kids are today, the young people in their late teens, early 20s? You may think they're irresponsible. So are we. We had both angels and devils with us, but we were kids. And kids don't get afraid. They don't become frightened. We were invincible. We were invincible in our minds.
This on D-Day was probably one of the main pillboxes that was firing on B Company. This particular company, this particular pillbox here, had a heavy machine gun and was firing up the beach, and it fired and probably caused about 50% of the casualties of B Company.
Because of the delay in the landing, our boat hit a mine and blew up. And it was actually the front of the assault craft where the officer, our lieutenant, was. And he fought like a devil to get the ramp down, even though we were still in deep water. And I turned to one of the tallest men in my platoon and said to him, "Here, you leap overboard and see how deep it is." No hesitation whatsoever, away he went. And it came up to about his chest, so I just shouted, "All right, fellas, let's go." And away we all went, scrambled over, up about chest deep. Some of the shorter men were more, the water was more likely up to their neck. But we all got to the beach, and we were soaking wet, and some of the fellas got hit on the run into the beach.
I was hit and knocked off my feet. This would be within 15 feet of leaving the landing craft. We didn't land in deep water. And when I came up out of the water, there wasn't many of the section left. The section of 10 men, 7 of them were killed before they got out of the water. Shot.
I was fortunate enough that I got out of the boat, and our sergeant had been blown to pieces when we struck an underwater mine. Charlie Dalton had been hit. I went to see if I could help him, but he said no. He said, "You keep on going." So away I went.
So when we rushed out, when the ramps went down, I laughingly said, well, I shouted, "Follow me," because that seemed to be the right thing to say at a time like that, and disappeared into 6 feet of water. And that caused a laugh or two. But anyway, we got out of the water and onto the beach, but we had about 200 yards to walk up the beach, soaking wet. And the uniforms we had at the time, they thought that Germans might use chemical warfare. So we had impregnated battle dress, which, when they're wet, turns stiff. And so the thought of galloping up the beach, you could just barely put one foot in front of the other.
I watched my sergeant, a Jewish lad, Freddie Harris, first out of our craft, never got out of the water. Johnny Gibson, my corporal, never got out of the water. Fred Eamon, rifleman, never got out of the water. Ted Westerby, never got out of the water. John Kirkland, Boynton, neither one of them got out of the water. Doug Reed, my number 2 on the gun, never got out of the water. Al Kennedy, we got Bren Gunner, never got out of the water. Doug Reed's brother, the 2 of them are buried in 6 feet apart at Bernières-sur-Mer at the cemetery. These are people I remember. These are only my guys, my tent, my section.
That particular house there on there, when we were looking at the aerial photographs and the maps, we were told that was the railway station, where in fact the railway station is just behind that. But this was our objective for our company, a company.
As an officer, your biggest fear, other than the fact that you're scared you're going to be killed, but what is more fear is that you're not going to perform. I mean, here you are, particularly in an assault landing. I mean, there's nowhere to hide. There you are on a beach, nothing you can get behind, no nice trees lying down that you could, and so you have this terrible feeling, will they follow you? Now, we had trained together, the man and myself, for 2.5, 3 years, and we knew each other like the back of our hands. We were all volunteers. You have to realize that we were the only army that was all volunteers, was the Canadian Army. Everybody else was a conscripted army. But everybody we had was there because he wanted to be there. And so you had this feeling that if they were that keen, you had a grave responsibility in commanding them. And I remember about 3/4 of the way up to the wall, I finally sneaked to look back, and there were a whole line of people lying on the beach. And my first thought was, they'd gone to ground. They didn't follow me. And then I realized that they hadn't gone to ground, they were casualties. And that these machine guns, which were still firing, were shooting at the ones that were lying there wounded and dead. And those they hadn't killed in the first breath, they were killing then. There's nothing prepares you for this. I mean, it's something that happens, and you just have to try and react as if it was a normal situation, which it isn't, because these are not only your soldiers, but they're your friends, too.
There was 3 guys carrying a ladder just to the right of me, I guess 10 feet away. 3 guys carrying a long, heavy ladder to get over the wall, which we didn't need at all. The first guy, I guess, stepped over the mine. The middle guy stepped on the mine, and he just became a mass of red. I could hear him screaming for 10 or 15 minutes later after I'd got over the wall. All I was worried about is how fast I could get to that wall.
What they drilled at us, don't stop for your wounded. Seemingly, this is one of the things that happened at Dieppe. They stopped on the beach, and you stopped to help someone. You got it too. They told us it wasn't our job to help your wounded pals. You were to leave them. Medical people would look after them, which makes sense. Think about it.
I think the very first time that I really realized how bad it was, Corporal Dainty was between me and the wall, and all of a sudden I heard bullets hitting him. But then when I went along the beach, it was absolute carnage. It's unbelievable. There were people dead in all different positions, and there were some who were just barely alive, and they were just getting to them with the stretcher bearers and starting to give them morphine and fix up what they could and get them ready to evacuate.
Kill or be killed. And oh my goodness, is that ever so true? Because unlike the other arms of the service, the Air Force or the artillery, you don't see the enemy. With the infantry, you're face to face. And it's then that you realize that self-preservation is the #1 law of nature. I was in a trench that we dug, and I come from a fairly religious family, and we followed the 10 Commandments, and my mother and father made sure we did, and we were a well-disciplined family. And I always remember, thou shalt not kill. And I said to myself, Dave Kingston, what's happened to you? But that soon passed. It's a strange sort of feeling when you realize all of your friends are wounded or dead, and of course you've never experienced this type of thing before. You're not really mad at the enemy, but you want to get even. That's the way I felt.
When we landed out in the water, we had to run from the water to the wall. And this wall was about up to this high, about 6 feet. And Jack Simpson got killed right beside me down by the beach, he was badly wounded. So when I got to the wall, I was over the wall in one leap, and at the top of this wall at that time was a little bit of barbed wire, not very much. And then on the other side was a railway that was about 36 inches wide. And the enemy from way down there had a machine gun trained right down the beach. And it was machine gunning down there.
I went right straight for the wall. And I got under, there was a concave wall like this, and he couldn't bring his guns down low enough after I got up underneath the wall. And then a young officer threw a couple of grenades in through the parapet that killed the men who were in the German bunker.
We were now over the railway tracks. Now we got a whole pile of this concertina wire, this stretchy wire. And to go through that, you lay on your back with your wire cutters, and as you cut the strand, it opens up. Now, you've heard the story before? Well, the NCOs were the only ones that had wire cutters. Now, it's something like Wasaga Beach. It's just a little beach town. Only all these little cottages were lined with concrete and guns and all that kind of stuff. And it was desirable for us, there was more cover for us to move to our left. So the chaplain I left, his name was Bert Shepard. He just died a couple of years ago, cancer. Charlie Martin was on my right. He had the wire cutters. So he hollers to me out loud. My nickname was Boots. He says, "Boots, I'm going to throw these wire cutters over you. Watch for them, then you throw them to Shep and tell him to cut a hole through that wire. We'll all make a run together." And Shep hollers back, and I can't repeat the words. He says, "But did you tell him to go to you-know-what?" He says, "He's making more money than I have. Let him go first." Can you imagine remembering a thing like that and all that stuff flying around?
Once through the wire and past a minefield, we enter Bernières-sur-Mer as liberators. Enemy resistance seems to consist mainly of snipers, but we can't find them until they fire on us.
Elle les a vus à 3 heures. Oui, mais moi j'ai pas vu ça. Ben, et je vais vous dire, j'ai pas pu les voir. Moi, je les ai vus drôlement parce que j'étais malade cette journée-là. J'étais malade pendant, ça faisait 8 jours que j'étais au lit.
Donc vous avez pas pu les voir.
J'étais dans ma chambre. C'est quand j'ai entendu du bruit, j'ai entendu le char passer. C'est comme ça que je me suis levé. Et je les féliciterai. Et je les féliciterai parce que bon, ben, il avait du courage. C'était des jeunes. C'était beaucoup des jeunes, des jeunes de 19, 20 ans, 21 ans, 22 ans. C'était tout jeune qui étaient là. Je vois encore le soir même du 6 juin, un Canadien arrivait, un jeune Canadien arrivait et dit auriez-vous, il demande à ma mère, parce que mon père était prisonnier, auriez-vous un peu de bois pour faire une croix à mon frère qui a été enterré qu'on a d'abord, que ma mère a entretenu la tombe pendant jusqu'à qu'il les enlève, si vous voulez.
Vous savez, j'ai certainement peut-être donné le sacrement des malades à des protestants, si fort possible. Vous savez, quand vous n'avez qu'une carte avec un gars qui ne peut plus parler, ben, vous faites... Alors, le bon Dieu fait le reste. Bon, vous faites ce que vous pouvez, le bon Dieu fait le reste. Qui est très précis. L'un a dit à ma sœur, je crois que c'est à ma sœur, je ne suis pas certain que ce soit à moi. L'un a dit à ma sœur, surtout quand mes parents viendront, comme je vous ai dit, dites-lui que je n'ai pas souffert. Dites-leur que je n'ai pas souffert. C'était... c'est pas vrai. Bon, il a beaucoup souffert.
I never saw one civilian from the beach until, indeed, I never saw one civilian. I've heard people talk about people on bicycles, but the advance company, what really happens with the advance company, there are bullets flying around, and they all stay hidden until we've gone through. Then the next wave, or the third wave, they come out to speak to the people that are coming behind.
C'était Coursol un petit peu à feu et à sang. Et il fallait rendre cette ambiance. Et bon, ce tableau m'avait été demandé pour une exposition. Je crois même que c'était au bas normand de Caen. Donc il m'a plu de faire cette rétrospective du débarquement. Les Anglais, très rapidement, ont monté des hôpitaux sous toile, dans le centre de Madame Mézès, qui est une propriété à Grès. Et alors, il manquait un petit peu de bénévoles pour s'occuper surtout des Français blessés. Alors, dans cette maison, on nous a demandé d'apporter notre concours, ce qu'on a fait volontiers. Donc, toutes les nuits, on faisait la garde des malades dans cette maison. Mais avant, il y avait une infirmière qu'on appelait Fifine, je ne sais pas pourquoi d'ailleurs, et elle me dit « On va voir si vous êtes assez capable de tenir le coup ». Je suis donc rentrée sous l'hôpital et c'est là que j'ai vu un chirurgien qui embobinait une jambe d'un soldat qui était coupé à peu près ici et la jambe était dans un seau. Je vous assure que ça m'a fait un coup énorme. J'ai pas voulu broncher parce que je me suis dit si on a besoin de moi, il faut aider. À ce moment-là, on pense pas beaucoup à soi, on pense aux autres. Et donc c'est comme ça que je suis devenue infirmière bénévole.
Je vous raconte l'anecdote. Lorsque je suis sorti, il y avait donc un soldat qui passait. Et il m'a parlé avec son accent canadien, que j'aime beaucoup, parce que ça me rappelle un peu quelques parlers normands. Il m'a demandé à boire, avez-vous à boire? Alors là, c'était ma stupéfaction, parce que je n'avais jamais vu de soldat canadien. Je croyais que c'était un Anglais, il me parlait français. Et alors c'est là qu'il y a eu quelque chose qui s'est passé entre lui et moi. Je ne peux pas vous le définir parce que c'est une impression personnelle de ce jeune qui avait mon âge, qui a pris ma place, qui était volontaire, qui venait du Canada et qui partait à ma place. Et je vois son regard, je le vois encore. Je le vois encore monter au front. Et au fond, la libération, c'était ça. C'était son sang, peut-être qu'il a perdu après, et moi qui avais son âge, j'aurais pu être à sa place. C'est pour ça que, pour les Canadiens, j'ai un respect vraiment du fond du cœur. Et je ne saurais jamais trop, quand vous allez retourner au Canada, là, il faut leur dire, dites-leur qu'il y en a encore qui pensent à eux, qui pensent à leurs fils, à leurs parents, à leur famille.
It's less than an hour since we landed. All the NCOs in our boat are dead, so I asked Jimmy Sackfield to take a section behind the houses while the rest of us go down the road.
We've advanced about 400 yards, about 375, 400 yards from the beach, and we're still moving very rapidly. We've only been about 12 or 14 minutes getting here off the beach, through the barbed wire, across the minefield, and we'd advanced down to the bend here. And of course, as soon as we got to the bend here, we could see the church. And we expected a fair amount of fire from the church. Right here, we got one burst of fire from a little bit on the left from the window. Just before we got to the house on the left here, and a sniper or some kind of rifleman was firing at us. And he fired one shot and then he disappeared. And just shortly after, the machine gun opened up, was somewhere in the area just by the church. And they fired two bursts down the road, and then they came running out with their hands up. There was probably, I think there was 4 of them. Well, we got around the bend about 25 minutes at the end of the village after we'd left the beach, and there was the 5 of us got there, and then we knew that George Dalzell and Jack Simpson and Stock and Catling, and then it suddenly realized, especially when you'd known these people, and they were mostly from my old platoon. I'd known them all for 4 years, and I just went behind the stone wall. I couldn't help but cry. You just couldn't realize. It was unbelievable that 24 hours before, these men were just 20, 23-year-old men, and suddenly here we had on the beach over 40 or 50 men dead and 50 casualties, more than that. It was hard to believe when the 5 of us had made it right to the end of the village, and then the rest of the platoons moved up. It was so emotional, it's hard to explain, because you just broke down and cried.
Even after dark, D-Day is still not over for us. Just before midnight, there are shouts and machine gun fire. An enemy patrol infiltrates our position. It's our first night fighting. The enemy knows where we are, but we don't know who's the enemy and who's not. We capture 4 of them and the firing stops. But then a German jumps into a trench with Frank Mumberson, who jams his bayonet into the man's stomach, but in a narrow trench he can't get the bayonet out. And they're both yelling like crazy. Later, we send the German back to the first aid post.
We found these fellas, McLaughlin and Crawford and 6 other fellas, shot there. And, you know, they had been wounded and they just shot them right behind the ear. Well, I was very upset about that, and I said, well, if that's the way they want it, we won't take prisoners, you know, automatically. Well, lo and behold, we took some prisoners the next day. And do you think you could shoot them? No way. And I can tell you, I tried. I was, you know, I was still, as you say, very emotionally and upset about that. I thought, well, but I couldn't do it.
I got a letter from my church, from Canon Bank, saying he'd said a prayer when my flowers arrived for all those in A Company who had been killed. He reads my letters aloud in church. The letters we get tell us we're in the thoughts of the people back home. I want them to know they're in our thoughts too. No other Allied troops have been away for as long as we have, and that makes us think of home a whole lot more.
I can remember them all. I can remember every one of them very clearly, but I can remember more than that. I could take you to Boulogne, and I could take you to the street, I think, in the building where Jimmy Young and Steve de Blois were killed. They were both D-Day veterans, landed on D-Day. I could draw a sketch just how they lay there. I could just see them as if I was looking at a photograph. Our Jimmy Sackfield, he got hit in the left shoulder. He was wounded, very bad, and we thought we'd saved him. We gave him 2 shots of morphine, but he died of wounds. Our Jimmy Young, he was unbelievable, Jimmy was. He did a heroic job at Copp. He helped me carry the 51st Division wounded off when Germany was wounded. And then he was killed, as I said, at Boulogne. Yeah, our Corporal George Dezelle, that was sad, you know. He was the company clerk, and he wanted to go in on D-Day, you know, with the boys. And he didn't have to go. I was really upset when he was killed. Well, Gilmay, I knew him fairly well. My wife knew him too, and we knew his wife, of course. He married an English girl. He was killed on D-Day. I'm not sure whether it was mortar fire, but over by the rocks. I didn't see him killed, but I know he was killed over from the right-hand boat. That is Buck Hawkins. He was killed he landed on D-Day, and he was one of the main men that took the right flank of Bernières-sur-Mer. Oh, he was a lovely person. He was 39. He had 2 children, and he was a real gentleman, quiet, unassuming fella. He never wanted to be a corporal. As a matter of fact, we made him a corporal once, and that night he went out with the boys, and he came back, and he said, "I can't take those guys into action. He's dead." But he's a wonderful guy. He looked after the boys like, you know, he was a daddy for everybody, you know, including me. And he did such a good job. You know, that's what makes it very difficult, because I could stand here and write 50 citations. They all deserve the Victoria Cross. I'm all right now. But he loved his family and his country. And he gave everything for his country. But he was one of many, you know. There was hundreds and thousands of them died.
So many have been taken, I have an idiotic thought. Why is it done this way? 4 years of training and living together with a common purpose. Friends who are like brothers. Now half are lost. Why didn't they just round up any collection of men in uniform and throw them into this slaughter? Why these, when anyone, somebody else, but not these men, could have paid this price? In grief, there is not always good sense. It is one of those times. And yet, in another way, a kind of miracle has happened. The Queen's Own Rifles, 800 of us, despite the painful price, have been successful today. We have no idea how the Americans, the British, or even the other Canadians have fared, but there's a pride in what we've done, although darkened by the terrible losses and the realization that this is only the beginning.
Dear Charlie, thank you for writing to us. It's grand to know that our son had the esteem and the confidence of his buddies during his life. We thank God he lived a good, clean life and did what he could.
Dear Charlie, we were so happy to receive your letter and to know a little about my brother, Amos Regan. We felt so utterly helpless out here when we heard of his death. The circumstances were very tragic to us. Amos's wife Shirley gave birth to his son the very morning Amos was killed.
I didn't know what that meant. I thought maybe he wouldn't be coming back for a while, but somehow or another, I guess he knew that he wouldn't be coming back ever.
I wonder if you could write again, Charlie, and let us have some more news of Jim. What was it he did on D-Day that made the Toronto paper call him a hero?